Moonrise is shaping up to be one of the most impactful sets in Elestrals history. With the inclusion of cards like Tornadin, Electronite, and Fulgorix, it's shaping up to be an interesting metagame. But there's been a card that's been a sleeper pick in my eyes that I don't think enough people are experimenting with, and that is Lunar Phase Full Moon. If you're unfamiliar with what this card does, this card says you can enchant up to 2 Lunar to an Elestral on your field. And when this Lunar Phase is discarded by another Lunar Phase, you can foretell 3. So why is enchanting 2 Lunar Spirits to your field so broken? I'm glad you asked, because today we're going to go over 16 ways that you're able to abuse this card in the Moonrise meta. As always, before we get into things, if you want to support us here at the Elestronauts, make sure to use our Moonrise affiliate code down in the description if you're picking up any product from the official Elestrals site. So let's talk about why Full Moon is so good. We're going to start with some of the most obvious ways that you can use Full Moon first, and then as the video goes on, we'll get to some of the more niche interactions that you can abuse with this powerful counter rune. First things first, obviously you're going to be able to use this with Werepup to get to Like a Void. If you're unfamiliar with what Werepup does in Moonrise, it can search for any lunar phase, but whenever Full Moon is cast, it can ascend itself from the deck into Like a Void, which is unaffected by counter runes that turn. Like a Void itself is shaping up to be a very powerful card in the Moonrise metagame, being able to have 4 spirits on itself by the time that you're done ascending over top of Werepup and swinging for piercing damage is nothing to scoff at. That's probably the most obvious thing that you could be doing with Full Moon, but you could also play this in the Voldusk deck. Voldusk being able to either draw an additional card or heal for 1, but it also lets you cheat out the 3-drop Volclips a lot easier by enchanting 2 spirits to your Voldusk, or maybe even a Werepup that you still had on the field. You could still get into Volclips that way for an easy ascension. Speaking of easy ascensions, Full Moon is probably the reason that Pharogeist is at 1, because Full Moon can turn any Elestral in the game into a Pharogeist. And you're probably asking, what do you mean by that? Let's take Astrabbit, for example. A Thunder Elestral. That doesn't matter all too much. It doesn't matter what spirit is enchanting this Astrabbit to begin with. It could be Misenchanted. It could be a Frost Rabbit for all intents and purposes. If I cast Full Moon, enchanting 2 lunar spirits to that Frost Rabbit, I can then just slap a Solar Spirit on it and ascend that bunny into a Pharogeist with 4 spirits, even though one of them is incorrect. I now have a Pharogeist on my field, and you're going to have to find a way to deal with that. Full Moon turning any Elestral into Geist is an issue, which is why I think that Geist going to 1 was probably a really good thing, even though it was preemptive. Number 4 on our list is actually going to come from the battle step. If you're unfamiliar with what I mean by the battle step, there is a very, very specific window in the battle phase in which an Elestral declares an attack called the battle step that only certain cards can be activated. If you've been playing the game for a bit, you know that Gorgon's Gaze is typically the only card, for the most part, that is getting cast in the battle step, but Full Moon can also be used here as well, almost as a jump scare, surprise, extra damage by enchanting 2 more spirits to your field. So what you thought was only going to be 1 damage, so you didn't shield or tsunami, randomly turns into 3. Oh, hold on, I'm thinking getting a call real quick.
I got it, Joshy. It's gold, Josh, gold. Imagine a game state where you control only a set Shield of Achilles. In your hand, Joshy, is 3 Ambrosia Viscerous Hurricane. You control 6 spirits in your spirit deck, Josh. It's perfect. It's immaculate. It's simple. Your opponent has a Misenchanted P-Gust. They have 3 set runes and no cards in hand. They have 11 spirits in their spirit deck, Joshy. Do you shield the P-Gust? Oh, you didn't shield the P-Gust? It's simple, Josh. You lose. You lose. The P-Gust has won the game. They attack. You proceed to the battle step, Joshy, and they activate the lunar phase. They activate Lunar Phase Full Moon, Joshy, and then it becomes a 3-spirit P-Gust. But then they play another one, Joshy, and it becomes a 5-spirit P-Gust. But that's not all. Then they play another one, Joshy, and now it has 7 spirits, Josh. And now you lose. The P-Gust has killed you, Joshy. The game is over, all because you didn't shield the P-Gust, Joshy. You should have shielded the P-Gust, Joshy. Why didn't you do that, Joshy? The game is over. You lose. It's gold. It's simple. It's easy.
All jokes aside, Battle Step Full Moon is something that you're going to have to worry about, especially since it can be splashed into technically any deck. For all my bear enjoyers out there, Full Moon can basically act as a don't poke the bear. Obviously not to the extent of gaining 4 attack, but you can add 2 additional attack. And the one thing that's different about Full Moon under Temple of the Moon is that you're actually going to be able to get additional damage as well, because your Elestral will have at least 3 spirits to your opponent's potential 1 or 2. Including in other defensive tactics, one of the cards that Full Moon lets you play around is Dense Fog. Dense Fog is a card that suppresses all non-lunar enchanted Elestrals. If you were to play an Elestral that would lose to a Dense Fog, if you do play Full Moon, you'd be able to dodge Dense Fog. Dense Fog at the moment has not been a particularly good counter rune, and I don't expect it to be in the Moonrise meta, especially with the presence of Full Moon and a lot of other lunar cards. However, if Dense Fog ends up being good in the future, potentially Full Moon might act as a countermeasure to a counter rune like that. And while we're on the topic of playing around cards like Dense Fog, there are also other cards that are introduced in Moonrise that require your opponent to not have lunar or solar enchanting spirits on them, being Nabi and Doppelganger. Full Moon will also give you the ability to counteract cards like Nabi, and Doppelganger for that matter, because you're able to put lunar spirits underneath your Elestrals so they don't get debuffed by the Nabi effect. One of the niche scenarios that you're able to take advantage of with Full Moon is to fake a misenchantment of a card. What do I mean by this? So, for example, let's say I have a Specteris in my hand, and I decided to water enchant that Specteris. I can give the illusion that my Specteris is only going to have 4 attack, and I'm playing this to play around a Tsunami. Little does my opponent know that actually I have a Full Moon set, and I'm going to swing my 4 attack Specteris into their Jolton, but actually it's going to be 5 attack because of the Full Moon that I have set. This type of interaction only really works with specifically lunar enchanted Elestrals, so you can properly enchant them afterwards, but you can fake trying to play around a Tsunami and then give them their proper enchantments to do a lot of crazy damage and turn their effects online. We've talked a lot about the implications between Temple of the Moon and the lunar phase Full Moon, and one other card that you are able to play around a lot more effectively is actually Cryoblast. Cryoblast in the Daybreak meta has shown its full force as being one of the premier removal runes in the meta. I don't expect that to go away anytime soon. However, if you are playing against a lunar deck, you are able to play around Cryoblast much more effectively, especially with your 1 defense lunar Elestrals, if you have Temple of the Moon up. Even if you're not playing a lunar deck and you happen to have a card that is susceptible to Cryoblast, but you have Temple of the Moon currently up and active, you can chain Full Moon to put 2 more lunar spirits on your Elestral to raise its defense under the temple so that it no longer dies to that removal rune. At this point, we're going to start getting into some of the more niche scenarios for Full Moon that probably won't come up that often, but they are still really cool plays that you can do. One of the interesting things you can do with Pandilence is you cast the Pandilence, you activate the Full Moon, put 2 more lunar spirits underneath the Pandilence, and disenchant from the Pandilence to reset the Full Moon. Technically, you have infinite activations of Full Moon as long as you have the spirits for it, and this is just a recurring loop that'll happen every single turn. And under a Temple of the Moon, Pandilence can get really scary really quick. The next interaction is with a card that technically has already been out in the Shattered Stars packs, and that is Gloom Bat. One of the things that's really interesting about Gloom Bat is the fact that you can special cast it from your hand if your opponent has 2 or more set runes in their rune row. So one of the things you can do with the Gloom Bat is special cast it, again, if that condition is met, activate the Full Moon to put additional spirits underneath the Gloom Bat, and then ascend into any one of the 3 drops that you want. Hell, you could even go for Posthumous or Fulgorix immediately if you wanted to. Technically, Full Moon is also very good for any Elestral that disenchants from itself to activate an effect. It's not good for the fact that it will misenchant them. However, I think we all know how scary a Boom Bat is if it gets to stick around. Even though the Boom Bat would have 2 lunar spirits underneath it, I still even have the ability to re-enchant it properly and use it for its destruction effect again. You can also use this for cards like Pandilence for getting back powerful invoke runes, looping Ambrosias, Earthquake, whatever you need. Full Moon is also particularly good for cards that need to Nexus Lunar Spirits. The two cards that do this the most in this set are Comalus and Elestronauts. Now, why am I bringing up these examples specifically? There are plenty of scenarios in which you don't necessarily have a Nexus bank, but you do have two Elestrals on your field. Now, where this typically comes up is maybe you have like a Werepop and you have a Comalus in hand. I would go for the Full Moon, maybe go into the Werepop or the Comalus itself, trigger the Werepop, go into a Like a Void, and then Nexus using the Comalus effect to search a Pharogeist in case they don't deal with both the Like a Void and the Comalus. Now, another card that you could use this with again is Elestronauts. Now, if I don't happen to have a Zeus on the field, but I do have another Elestral that I could Nexus from, I no longer have to kill that other Elestral in order to resolve the Nexus effect. I can use the Full Moon to enchant to that other Elestral and then Nexus from that other Elestral to the Elestronauts to then trigger its effect to summon an Electrifly. Speaking of even more Moonrise cards that can take advantage of this is a card like Pulveroar. Now, if you don't have an abundance of lunar spirits on your field with something like Artemis or Temple of the Moon, you can use the Full Moon lunar phase to put additional spirits on your field to disenchant to special cast the Pulveroar from your hand. It's just a quick and easy way to deal with things like PTA in case you don't have those Nexus banks or other lunar spirits on your field. We've already talked about trying to turbo out 3-drops in general, like Pharogeist, Fulgorix, even Posthumous, but Full Moon is also a huge buff for the 15s deck, and by 15s I mean just big Penterror, slap the biggest Celestial you can possibly put on the field as soon as possible deck. Because you're able to put 2 spirits on any Elestral on the field, you can ascend into any big 3-drop you want. So whatever your favorite flavor of boss monster is, just go ahead and play that. Moving down to the last 2 interactions that we need to go over on this list is a card called Porcuwraith. Porcuwraith is quite the unassuming card on its own, although when paired with other cards, it gets very terrifying very quickly, especially with a card like Full Moon. So, what Porcuwraith does is when Porcuwraith enters battle with an Elestral, you can give that Elestral -2 attack for each lunar enchanting this Porcuwraith until the end phase. So, if you Full Moon to Porcuwraith, it's effectively giving your opponent's Elestral -6 attack, which means that Porcuwraith can crash with something that even has 8 attack. If you pair that along with a Temple of the Moon, Porcuwraith can even compete with something that has 11 attack, and that is insane. The last interaction on this list is actually to pair along with a card released from Frostfall, which is Divine Blessing. You can probably see where this interaction is going. All you're doing is just putting additional spirits on your field so that you're able to disenchant from your field to resolve Divine Blessing. If Invoke runes prove to be extremely powerful in the Moonrise format, maybe we see the combination of Full Moon and Divine Blessing come up together. And that does it for every single application that I have found for Full Moon in the Moonrise meta. Let me know if you found anything crazy down in the comments below. I'd love to see if there's been any more innovation with this card, or if there's anything that you found interesting in this list that you weren't even aware of to begin with. I don't know about you all, but I'm really excited for the Moonrise meta, which is very quickly approaching over the next couple of weeks. So if you want to stay up to date with all of the tech choices, lists, and advancements that we have found here in the metagame from the Elestronauts, make sure to like, subscribe, and check out the rest of the content on our channel. We're planning on posting a lot more in 2025, and I hope you're around for the ride.